A 9-year-old boy accidentally recorded the moment his father destroyed his own life. I know that sounds impossible. I thought so too. But at 11:47 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday night in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I pressed play on a forgotten audio file from my grandson Noah's tablet and heard my son planning how to take my house, my savings, and my independence. The strangest part, he never imagined I was the one person qualified to prove exactly what he'd done. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and joining us for more real stories about family betrayal and unexpected justice. What I discovered on that tablet changed everything. My name is Travis Reed, and at 68 years old, I've learned that life has a sense of humor that can be downright cruel. The kind that waits until you finally think you've earned a little peace. Then it hands you a lesson you never asked for. I live in a modest ranch-style house on Bever Avenue SE in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, a backyard that always seems to grow more weeds than tomatoes no matter how much effort I put into it. My wife Linda and I bought the house in 1987. Back when interest rates were high, my hair was brown, and I believed I knew exactly how life would unfold. Turns out I was wrong about at least 2 of those things. Linda passed away 6 years before all of this happened. Cancer. One of those words that changes every conversation the moment it enters the room. For a while after she died, I wandered through life like a man carrying a map for a city that no longer existed. You know that feeling, when your routine stays the same, but the person who made it meaningful is suddenly gone. Eventually, I adjusted. Not because I wanted to, because life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Every morning at 7:30, I'd drive my silver 2009 Ford Ranger down First Avenue and stop at Riley's Cafe. The waitress Cheryl always had my coffee ready before I sat down. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. According to Cheryl, that made me either a serious man or a psychopath. The jury is still out. Most mornings, I'd sit by the window and read the local news while pretending not to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. A retired man develops strange hobbies. That's one of them. The other was spending time with my grandson, Noah Reed, 9 years old, skinny as a fence post, messy brown hair, an endless supply of questions, and an attention span that lasted approximately 17 seconds. If Noah wasn't asking questions, something was probably wrong. The kid loved technology, loved it. While most children his age were watching videos, Noah was creating them, recording them, editing them, narrating them. He carried a tablet everywhere, absolutely everywhere. I once watched him bring it into a grocery store and record a 10-minute documentary about cereal boxes. The boy interviewed a box of Cheerios. The Cheerios apparently had strong opinions. Noah called his recordings Noah's World. Sometimes they were interviews, sometimes they were pretend radio shows, sometimes they were dramatic documentaries about squirrels in my backyard. I wish I were joking. One Saturday afternoon, he spent 45 minutes tracking a squirrel he named Detective Peanut. The squirrel solved no crimes. But according to Noah, he came very close. Those afternoons with Noah became the brightest part of my week, especially after Linda died. I never told him that. Kids shouldn't carry the emotional weight of adults. But he brought laughter back into this house. And that's a gift you can't put a price on. My best friend Frank Morales liked to joke that Noah was keeping me alive through sheer exhaustion. Frank had been my friend for over 30 years. Retired police officer, 70 years old, bad knees, loud opinions, and absolutely no filter. Frank had the remarkable ability to offend someone while trying to compliment them. One afternoon at Riley's Cafe, he told a woman her pie looked excellent, then added that she looked like someone who would know pie very well. It did not go over well. Frank claimed people were becoming too sensitive. The rest of us disagreed. Still, he was loyal. The kind of friend who would show up at 2 in the morning if your furnace exploded, or if you needed help burying a body. Not that either of us had tested the second scenario, at least not recently. Then there was Ethan, my son, 42 years old, successful on paper, real estate agent, nice house in Marion, nice clothes, nice SUV, the kind of life that looks impressive on social media. You know the type. Everything appears perfect from a distance, but distance hides cracks. Ethan wasn't a bad son, at least not then. That's important. I need you to understand something. People rarely wake up one morning and become villains. Life is usually messier than that. Ethan worked hard. He loved Noah. He called me regularly. He visited often enough. Maybe not as much as when he was younger, but life gets busy. I understood that. Or at least I thought I did. Looking back now, there were signs. Tiny signs. Easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. The first thing I noticed was how often our conversations drifted toward money. Not directly. Never directly. Ethan was smarter than that. Instead, he'd ask questions, casual questions, questions that sounded harmless. How's retirement treating you, Dad? You still comfortable financially? That house must be worth a fortune these days. Things like that. At first, I thought nothing of it. Lots of people talk about money, especially with inflation, especially when housing prices were climbing. Then the questions became more specific. Did I still have my investment accounts? Had I updated my will recently? Was I keeping all my paperwork organized? Again, nothing alarming, not by itself, but enough to make me pause. The thing about spending 30 years analyzing voices is that you learn something most people don't. Words matter, but tone matters more. A person can tell the truth using the wrong tone, and they can lie using the right one. Something in Ethan's voice had started changing, just slightly, like a radio station drifting off frequency. Not enough to notice immediately, enough to feel. One Sunday afternoon, Noah and Ethan came over for burgers. We sat in the backyard under a blue patio umbrella Linda had insisted on buying years earlier. Noah spent most of the afternoon trying to convince Frank that squirrels were secretly organized. Frank argued that squirrels weren't smart enough. Noah responded by presenting evidence. The evidence was weak, but the confidence was impressive. Meanwhile, Ethan kept looking around the property, the garage, the fence, the house, the backyard, calculating, evaluating, measuring. At least that's what it felt like. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe not. After they left, Frank leaned back in his chair and watched Ethan's SUV disappear down the street. Then he looked at me. You ever get the feeling someone's thinking about something they haven't said out loud yet? I laughed. That's oddly specific. Frank shrugged. Comes with age. At the time, I dismissed it. I wish I hadn't, because less than 2 weeks later, Noah accidentally left his tablet at my house, and that forgotten little device would uncover a secret none of us were prepared to face. The funny thing about getting older is that people start assuming you've stopped noticing things. They mistake quietness for weakness, patience for confusion, silence for ignorance. Sometimes that works in your favor. At the time, though, I didn't realize it would save me. A few days after Noah left his tablet at my house, Ethan stopped by on a Thursday afternoon. It was April 11th. I remember because I'd spent the morning fighting with a lawnmower that clearly had personal issues with me. The lawnmower won. Ethan arrived around 3:30, driving his dark blue Chevrolet Tahoe. He walked into the garage carrying 2 coffees from Scooter's Coffee. One for himself, one for me. Now that might sound thoughtful, and maybe it was, but Ethan had never been much of a coffee delivery guy. That was the first thing that caught my attention. The second was that he seemed unusually cheerful. You know that look. The look people get when they're working toward something and think they're getting close. His smile reached his mouth, not his eyes. There's a difference. We sat on folding chairs inside the garage while I pretended to organize fishing gear I hadn't touched in years. After a few minutes of small talk, Ethan casually said something that made me pause. Dad, have you ever thought about downsizing? There it was. Again, that subject. I shrugged. Not really. You've got a big place. It's a normal house. Still. I took a sip of coffee. Still what? Ethan laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they're trying to sound relaxed. I don't know. It just seems like a lot for one person. I looked around. Same garage, same tools, same shelves Linda had painted 20 years earlier. It didn't feel like too much. It felt like home. I manage. Of course you do. Then he changed the subject, at least on the surface. But over the next hour, he kept circling back. The cost of maintaining property, the dangers of living alone, stories about seniors getting injured without anyone knowing, retirement communities, assisted living facilities. The topic kept appearing, then disappearing, then appearing again, like a shark fin breaking the surface of the water. When he finally left, I stood in the driveway watching his Tahoe disappear around the corner. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain why. And that bothered me, because for most of my adult life, my instincts had been one of my greatest assets. 30 years analyzing audio evidence teaches you to pay attention to tiny details. Tiny details often become big truths. The following week, Ethan came over again, twice. That was unusual. Not suspicious, just unusual. The second visit was stranger. He wanted to see my paperwork, not directly. Again, Ethan was too smart for that. Instead, he asked whether I had updated my will recently, whether my insurance policies were current, whether someone would know where important documents were if something happened to me. Reasonable questions. Completely reasonable. That's what made them dangerous. Bad intentions rarely arrive wearing a name tag. I told him everything was organized, which was true. Linda had always been meticulous. After she died, I kept every file exactly where she would have wanted it. The deed, the insurance records, the investment statements, the trust documents, everything. Ethan nodded. But I noticed something. Disappointment. Just a flash. Less than a second. Then it disappeared. Most people wouldn't have seen it. I did, because I spent decades studying human behavior through voices, and voices are connected to emotions. You learn to recognize when someone hears an answer they weren't hoping for. That night I called Frank. He answered on the third ring. Tell me you aren't calling because your television stopped working again. It wasn't my fault. It was absolutely your fault. We spent 5 minutes arguing about electronics before I brought up Ethan. Frank listened quietly. That alone told me he was paying attention. Normally, he'd interrupt every 15 seconds. When I finished talking, he was silent for a moment. Then he asked one question. Has he ever talked like this before? No. Then trust your gut. I don't have proof. You don't need proof to notice something feels off. That was classic Frank. Simple, direct, usually annoying, often correct. I hung up still unsure. Because here's the thing. Nobody wants to suspect their own child. Nobody. You can suspect a stranger. You can suspect a neighbor. You can suspect a business partner. But your child. Your mind fights against it. Every memory gets in the way. You remember scraped knees, school plays, birthday cakes, little league games. The version of them you raised, not the version standing in front of you today. That's what I was struggling with. Not evidence. Possibility. The possibility that something had changed. A week later, Noah came over after school. His father was running late, which meant I got an extra hour with my grandson. No complaints there. We ordered pizza from Tommaso's. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, the same order we'd been getting for years. Noah spent most of dinner explaining a complicated Minecraft project that sounded suspiciously like unpaid child labor involving virtual villagers. I nodded as if I understood every word. I did not. At one point, he grabbed his tablet and showed me a recording he'd made. It was another episode of Noah's World. This one featured a dramatic interview with a squirrel. Apparently, Detective Peanut had returned. The squirrel still wasn't solving crimes. Noah remained optimistic. After dinner, Ethan finally arrived. He seemed distracted, tired, agitated, more than usual. While Noah packed his backpack, Ethan wandered into the living room. His eyes drifted toward the hallway closet, then toward my office, then toward the bookshelf where I kept old family records. Again. Just a glance. Nothing obvious. But enough. When they left, I stood in the doorway waving goodbye. Noah rolled down the back window. See you Saturday, Grandpa. You got it, buddy. Then they drove away. I went back inside and found myself staring at the empty room. A strange feeling settled over me. Not fear. Not yet. More like anticipation. Like standing outside before a thunderstorm arrives. The air changes before the rain does. The next few days brought more of the same. More questions. More visits. More conversations about planning for the future. Then Ethan introduced a new topic. Power of attorney. That got my attention immediately. He brought it up during lunch at Riley's Cafe on a Tuesday, casually, far too casually. You should probably think about assigning someone power of attorney someday. I lowered my coffee cup. Someday? You never know what could happen. I'm healthy. Of course. There was that smile again, the one that never reached his eyes. I studied him carefully, then I asked a question. Why are you so interested in my paperwork lately? For a moment he froze. Only a moment. Then he laughed. Dad, I'm just trying to help. Maybe he was. Maybe part of him genuinely believed that, but something inside me whispered otherwise. And that whisper was getting louder. By the end of that week, I knew one thing for certain. Ethan wanted something. I didn't know what. I didn't know why. And I definitely didn't know how far he was willing to go. What I didn't realize was that the answer was already sitting inside my house, waiting on a forgotten tablet, waiting for me to press play. The recording almost didn't happen. That's the part that still amazes me. If Noah had remembered his tablet that evening, if I had gone to bed 10 minutes earlier, if the battery hadn't been nearly dead, none of what followed would have happened. Sometimes an entire life changes because of a forgotten charger. It was Friday evening, April 26th, a little after 6 o'clock. Noah had spent the afternoon at my house while Ethan handled some work appointments. The arrangement wasn't unusual. In fact, it had become one of our favorite routines. Noah would arrive carrying a backpack that somehow looked larger than he was. Inside would be snacks, half-finished school projects, random toys, and of course his tablet. Always the tablet. That afternoon we worked in the backyard. Or at least I worked. Noah supervised. Children are excellent supervisors. They contribute very little labor while offering extensive feedback. Around 5:30 we ordered our usual pizza from Tommaso's. Large pepperoni. Extra cheese. Noah spent dinner explaining why dinosaurs would have dominated modern society if they had survived. I pointed out several flaws in his theory. He ignored all of them. Confidence clearly runs in the family. After dinner, he wandered around the house recording another episode of Noah's World. At one point, he interviewed my golden retriever, Murphy. Murphy contributed nothing meaningful. The interview still received positive reviews from Noah. By 6:15, Ethan arrived. The moment he walked through the door, I noticed something. Stress. Real stress. His smile looked forced. His shoulders were tight. His eyes seemed distracted. He hugged Noah, shook my hand, made small talk. But his attention kept drifting elsewhere. The hallway, the living room, my office. I noticed. Again. He didn't realize I noticed. That happened a lot throughout this story. People assume older men stop paying attention. We're actually paying attention all the time. We just don't announce it. Ethan stayed only 10 minutes before gathering Noah's things: backpack, jacket, baseball cap, water bottle. Then they left. I watched them drive away from the front porch. Normal evening, normal goodbye. Nothing unusual. At least that's what I thought. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Did Noah leave his tablet there? I looked around. Sure enough, the tablet sat on the coffee table next to a bowl of pretzels. I texted back, "Yep. No worries, we'll get it tomorrow." Simple, ordinary, forgettable. Except it wasn't. Around 11:30 that night, I was getting ready for bed. I walked through the living room and noticed the tablet screen flashing. Low battery warning. The thing was about to die. I figured I'd plug it in. That was all. Nothing dramatic. Just a grandfather making sure his grandson's favorite toy didn't run out of power. I connected the charger and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then I noticed something strange. The screen was still open to Noah's recording app. Normally, dozens of little audio files filled the screen. Most had ridiculous names. Squirrel investigation. Murphy interview. Secret Agent Noah. Things like that. One file caught my eye immediately. Not because of what it said, because of what it didn't. It had no cartoon title, no joke, no creative name, just 4 words. Grandpa Houseplan. I frowned. That seemed odd. Maybe Noah had been making another pretend detective story. That would have made sense. The kid loved mysteries. I tapped the file. The recording length appeared. 22 minutes. Longer than usual. Much longer. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play. At first there was silence. Then background noise, a door closing, footsteps, muffled movement. I almost stopped listening. Then I heard a voice, a familiar voice, my son's voice. I froze, not emotionally, physically. My hands stopped moving. My breathing slowed. Every instinct I possessed suddenly focused on that speaker. Years of audio analysis training came rushing back before I even understood why. "He's starting to trust me more," Ethan said. The voice was crystal clear. Not maybe Ethan. Not sounds like Ethan. Ethan, 100%. I knew his voice better than anyone alive. For a few seconds, I assumed there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was recording something for work. Maybe Noah had accidentally captured a conversation. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent reason. Then another voice answered. A man. Older. Confident. Unknown. Good. Because once the paperwork is signed, everything gets easier. Paperwork. My stomach tightened. I turned up the volume. The conversation continued. At first, it sounded fragmented. Pieces of a discussion, references without context. Then the pieces started connecting, and when they connected, I felt something inside me go cold. Very cold. The second man asked about my house, not generally, specifically, property value, equity, expected sale price, potential timeline. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The recording continued. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. Then he said something I will never forget. "He's stubborn, but he's getting older. We just need people to believe he's not managing things well anymore." The room suddenly felt smaller. I stared at the tablet, certain I had misunderstood, certain there had to be another explanation. There wasn't. The next few minutes erased every doubt. They discussed me, my finances, my health, my house, my future, as if I weren't a person, as if I were an obstacle, a problem to solve, an asset to acquire. The worst part wasn't the greed. Stay with me here. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. The worst part was how casual Ethan sounded. No anger, no guilt, no hesitation, just business, like he was discussing weather forecasts, or grocery prices, or traffic. I listened in silence, unable to move, unable to stop. Memories kept crashing into me. Teaching Ethan to ride a bike, helping him move into his first apartment, paying college expenses. Holding him in the hospital the day he was born. All those memories were fighting against the voice coming from the speaker. The voice winning that fight. Then another sentence hit me like a hammer. The unidentified man asked, "And what about the grandson?" There was a pause. Then Ethan answered, "Noah doesn't need to know anything. We'll keep him out of it." I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt more than the others, because Noah wasn't part of this. He was just a kid, a little boy who loved dinosaurs and terrible detective stories. Yet somehow he had become part of their calculations, part of their plan. I kept listening, and the deeper I went into that recording, the more horrifying the picture became. This wasn't a random conversation. This wasn't wishful thinking. This wasn't frustration. This was preparation, planning, strategy. They had discussed details, steps, timing, backup options, contingencies. This conversation had happened before, maybe many times. And suddenly I understood something. The strange questions, the sudden concern, the discussions about power of attorney, the interest in my paperwork. None of it had been random, not one piece, everything connected, everything. And I still hadn't heard the worst part, because 5 minutes later Ethan revealed exactly how far he was willing to go. I listened to the entire recording 3 times that night. The first time as a father, the second time as a man who had just been betrayed, the third time as an audio forensic analyst. That third listening changed everything. Emotion can break you. Training can save you. Around 12:30 in the morning, I carried the tablet into my home office and closed the door. The same office where I'd spent years reviewing recordings for investigations. The same room where hundreds of people had unknowingly revealed the truth through their own voices. For the first time that night, I forced myself to stop reacting and start analyzing. That was familiar territory, comfortable territory, and frankly, I needed it. Because the father in me wanted to punch a hole through a wall. The analyst in me wanted evidence. Evidence wins. Anger doesn't. I put on an old pair of Sony MDR 7506 headphones that had somehow survived retirement. The foam padding was worn, the cable had been repaired twice, but they still worked. I connected them and started again from the beginning. Immediately, I noticed things I'd missed before. Tiny things. The kind of details most people never hear. The second man's voice, for example. His name appeared about 4 minutes into the recording. Ethan said it casually. "Derek, you're worrying too much." Derek. So now I knew. Derek Sutton, the local real estate investor. I knew the name. Most people in Cedar Rapids involved in property transactions knew the name. Derek bought distressed properties, flipped houses, chased quick profits. He wasn't exactly a criminal, but nobody ever accused him of being sentimental. That fit, unfortunately. I continued listening. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Derek asked how much debt Ethan was carrying. There was a long silence, then Ethan answered. "Just over $300,000. I nearly stopped breathing. $300,000. That number explained a lot. Suddenly, the expensive SUV made sense, the vacation photos, the new office lease, the expensive lifestyle. I remembered something Linda used to say. Some people buy success before they've earned it, then spend years paying interest on the illusion. Maybe that's what had happened. Maybe Ethan had gotten trapped. Maybe he was desperate. I wish I could tell you that realization made me feel better. It didn't. If anything, it made me feel worse. Because now I could see the path that led him here. Not excuse it. Understand it. There's a difference. People love simple villains. Real life rarely provides them. The recording continued. Derek asked another question. What if he refuses, meaning me, meaning Travis Reed, meaning the inconvenient old man standing between them and a payday? Ethan sighed. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. We don't need him to agree. We just need people to think he can't manage on his own anymore. I closed my eyes. Slowly. Carefully. That sentence mattered. A lot. Because now the objective was becoming clear. This wasn't about convincing me. This was about discrediting me. Creating a narrative, building a story. One where I was confused, forgetful, unstable. A man incapable of making his own decisions. And once that story existed, everything else became easier. Power of attorney, asset control, property sales, financial decisions, all of it. Derek seemed pleased. Then he asked how Ethan intended to do it. That answer was even worse. We document a few incidents. Incidents. The word sounded harmless. It wasn't. Ethan began listing examples. Leaving the stove on, forgetting appointments, getting lost while driving, misplacing financial records. Little things. Believable things. The sort of stories people expect from aging parents. The sort of stories that spread quickly because they sound reasonable. The sort of stories that become dangerous when repeated enough times. The frightening part. None of them had happened. Not one. They were discussing future lies, potential lies, planned lies, designed lies. I paused the recording. For a long moment, I simply sat there. The house was completely silent. Outside, a train horn echoed somewhere in the distance. A familiar Iowa sound. Normally comforting. Not that night. That night, everything felt different. Then my professional instincts kicked in again. I rewound the recording. Back to the beginning. This time, I ignored the conversation. Instead, I listened to the background. Years of experience had trained me to do that. People focus on words. Evidence often hides elsewhere. I heard an air conditioning unit, a fluorescent light hum, traffic, a door buzzer, then something else, a train crossing signal, very faint, almost hidden. I replayed it 3 times. There it was, distinctive, rhythmic, the kind of sound you only notice if you're looking for it. Interesting, very interesting. I opened a notebook, started taking notes, location indicators, environmental sounds, voice characteristics, time markers, everything. By 1:30 in the morning, my desk looked like I was preparing a criminal investigation. In some ways I was. Then another detail caught my attention, near the 17-minute mark. Ethan received a text message. I could hear the notification tone. Then Derek laughed. "Your ex-wife again," Ethan groaned. "Child support." Silence followed. Then Derek said something revealing. "That's why we need this done quickly." There it was, pressure, real pressure, the kind that drives people into terrible decisions: debt, child support, business problems, financial desperation. The pieces were starting to connect. And the picture wasn't pretty. At exactly 19 minutes and 43 seconds, the recording delivered its hardest blow. The conversation turned to Noah, my grandson, the child who had accidentally recorded the entire thing. Derek asked if Noah would spend more time with me once the property situation was settled. Ethan answered immediately, "No." One word, cold, sharp, final. Then he continued, "The less he knows, the better." I felt anger rise inside me, real anger, the kind that starts deep in your chest. Noah wasn't a financial asset. He wasn't a complication. He wasn't an obstacle. He was a child, a good child, an innocent child. Yet Ethan was discussing him like a variable in an equation. That hurt more than the attack on me. Maybe because parents expect disappointment. Grandchildren deserve protection. I don't know. I just know it hurt. A lot. Then came the final revelation, the one that transformed this from suspicion into certainty. Derek asked about timing, and Ethan answered, "We'll start with the power of attorney paperwork next month." Power of attorney. There it was, directly stated, no interpretation required, no assumptions necessary, no room for misunderstanding. The plan was real. The timeline was real. Everything was real. I removed the headphones and leaned back in my chair. For the first time all night, I looked around the office. Photos covered the shelves, family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. One picture showed Ethan at age 12 holding a fishing rod nearly taller than he was. I stared at that photograph for a long time, because the voice in the recording didn't sound like that boy anymore. It sounded like a stranger wearing my son's voice. But then something occurred to me. Pay attention to this next part. The recording wasn't just evidence, it was a blueprint. Every plan creates a trail. Every trail creates opportunities. And the biggest mistake Ethan had made wasn't plotting against me. The biggest mistake was assuming I would never discover it. The second biggest mistake was forgetting what I used to do for a living. Because while he was busy planning how to prove I wasn't competent, I was already collecting evidence proving exactly who he was. And before the sun came up, I knew there was only one person I needed to call: Frank Morales. I called Frank at 6:12 the next morning. That alone should tell you how serious the situation was. Nobody calls Frank Morales before 7 o'clock unless someone has died, been arrested, or accidentally purchased cryptocurrency. Frank answered on the fourth ring. "What exploded?" That was his standard greeting. "Nothing exploded." "Then why are you calling me at dawn?" "I need you to come over." Silence. Then his voice changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "What's wrong?" "I'll explain when you get here." 25 minutes later, Frank's battered red F-150 rolled into my driveway. The truck sounded like it was being held together by stubbornness and expired warranty paperwork. Frank stepped out carrying a travel mug the size of a fire extinguisher. He took one look at my face and immediately stopped joking. That told me everything. For Frank's seriousness was reserved for funerals and medical emergencies. We sat in my office. I handed him the headphones. Then I pressed play. For the next 22 minutes, neither of us spoke. Frank listened, completely still, completely silent. When the recording ended, he slowly removed the headphones. Then he stared at the desk for a long moment. Finally, he said one sentence. "Well." That was it. Just well. You know, a situation is bad when Frank Morales runs out of words. A minute later, he stood up and walked to the window. Then he turned around. "I always liked Ethan." "So did I." Frank nodded. "Still do." I understood exactly what he meant. Because liking someone and trusting someone aren't the same thing. Not anymore. He sat back down. "What do you want to do?" "Good question." The problem was I didn't have an answer yet. Part of me wanted to confront Ethan immediately. Drive to his office, play the recording, watch him explain himself, watch him squirm. But emotion rarely produces good strategy, and strategy was exactly what I needed. "I want evidence," I said. Frank smiled slightly. "There he is." "There who is?" "The investigator." That made me laugh. A little, not much, but enough. For the first time since finding the recording, I felt something besides anger. Purpose. There's a difference. Anger burns energy. Purpose directs it. The next 3 hours were spent turning my dining room table into a temporary investigation center. At one point, Frank looked around and said we resembled two retired spies operating on a budget. Honestly, he wasn't wrong. Coffee cups, legal pads, laptops, headphones, printed notes. The entire setup looked ridiculous, but it worked. I transferred the audio file from Noah's tablet onto multiple storage devices. A laptop, an external drive, a cloud backup, then another backup, then another. Paranoia is underrated when evidence is involved, especially evidence this important. After that, I began analyzing the recording properly. Not as a father, as a professional. I listened through studio headphones, adjusted frequencies, removed background noise, enhanced specific portions. Not enough to alter anything, just enough to hear more clearly. Years ago, this type of work had been routine. Now it felt strangely comforting, like reconnecting with an old version of myself, the version that existed before retirement, before grief, before betrayal, the version that solved problems. At one point, I isolated the environmental sounds behind the conversation. Frank watched the computer screen. You can really do that. Do what? Hear things nobody else hears. I shrugged. 30 years of practice. The truth is most people hear only the conversation. Professionals hear everything else too. The room, the building, the environment, the hidden clues. And those clues started revealing themselves. The air conditioning unit, traffic patterns, door buzzers, office acoustics. Then came the train crossing signal. Again, very faint but unmistakable. I played it several times. Frank frowned. I know that sound. So do I. We exchanged a look. There aren't many places in Cedar Rapids where that specific crossing signal could be heard from inside an office building. The list became surprisingly short. Interesting. Very interesting. Then another breakthrough appeared, around the 8-minute mark. A receptionist's voice. Barely audible. Just a few words. Most people would never notice. I almost missed it myself. But there it was. A female voice speaking to someone in the background, mentioning a suite number, Suite 304. I immediately started searching. Commercial offices, property management companies, business directories, locations near the railway crossing. Within 20 minutes, we found a likely match. A small office building on Collins Road, NE. Guess who rented space there, Derek Sutton? Frank stared at the screen, then slowly shook his head. They weren't even careful. No. They thought nobody would hear it. That was exactly the problem. Greed often creates carelessness. People become so focused on the reward that they forget the risk. And Ethan was making another mistake, a bigger one. He assumed I was vulnerable. That assumption was about to become expensive. Around noon, Frank and I took a break. We drove to Riley's Cafe, mostly because neither of us had eaten, partly because I needed a reminder that normal life still existed. Cheryl greeted us as usual. Why do you both look like you're planning a bank robbery? Frank answered immediately. We're retired. We don't have the energy. That earned a laugh, mine included. For 10 minutes, we talked about sports, weather, anything except Ethan. It felt good, necessary even. You can't spend every hour staring into darkness. Eventually, the darkness starts staring back. After lunch, we returned to my house, and that's when things became even more interesting. I started examining the file metadata. Most people never think about metadata, but metadata tells stories, creation dates, modification times, device information, file history, tiny digital fingerprints. The recording had been created at 4:37 p.m. 3 days earlier. That alone mattered, because Ethan had visited me the following day, acting normal, smiling, asking questions, discussing retirement planning, all while knowing this recording existed. That realization hit hard, very hard. Then I noticed something else. The recording hadn't been intentionally saved. It appeared to be accidental. Noah must have started recording while playing with the tablet, then dropped it into a backpack or left it running nearby, which meant Ethan never knew he had been recorded. That changed everything. Because intentional recordings can be challenged. Accidental recordings often carry more credibility. There is no performance, no preparation, just truth, raw and unfiltered. By late afternoon, our evidence file had grown considerably. Audio copies, metadata reports, location analysis, written notes, timelines, everything organized, everything documented. Frank leaned back in his chair. You know what's funny? Probably not. They spent months creating a plan. I nodded. Looks that way. And in one day you've already started taking it apart. I looked down at the recording, then at the family photo beside my desk, the one showing Ethan at age 12. For a moment, sadness replaced anger again, because none of this felt like victory. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It felt like survival. The truth was becoming clear. I wasn't preparing to defeat a stranger. I was preparing to stop my own son. And that's a battle nobody wins completely. Still, one thing had become certain. Ethan believed he was controlling the timeline. He believed he was several steps ahead. He believed I was unaware. The reality was exactly the opposite. By sunset, I knew where the meeting likely happened. I knew who was involved. I knew what they wanted. And most importantly, I knew their plan. The question was no longer whether I could stop them. The question was how. And that answer would begin with a phone call to a lawyer named Rebecca Lawson. I met Rebecca Lawson 3 days later. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., downtown Cedar Rapids. Lawson and Whitmore Estate Planning sat on the third floor of a red brick building overlooking 2nd Avenue, the kind of office that smelled faintly of coffee paper and expensive legal advice. Rebecca was 53 years old, sharp-eyed, straightforward, the type of attorney who could politely destroy your argument while making you thank her for the experience. Linda and I had worked with her years earlier when updating our estate plan. I trusted her. More importantly, she had never once mistaken kindness for weakness. That mattered. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warm smile. Then she saw my expression. The smile faded immediately. Something's wrong, I nodded. Very. An hour later, she had heard the entire recording. Unlike Frank, Rebecca didn't react emotionally. Her face remained almost completely still. That was somehow more unsettling. When the recording ended, she folded her hands together. Do you know what your son is attempting? I have a pretty good idea. He isn't trying to convince you. No. He's trying to create a legal narrative. Exactly. That was the phrase. A legal narrative, not reality. A story. A version of reality that could be sold to other people. Doctors, attorneys, financial institutions, courts. Anyone willing to believe it. Rebecca leaned forward. The good news is that he's nowhere near succeeding. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. The bad news is that he's clearly preparing. That didn't surprise me. Nothing surprised me anymore. Rebecca opened a legal pad. We need to move before he does. Now we were speaking my language. Not revenge. Preparation. That's an important distinction. People hear stories like this and imagine some dramatic master plan. The truth is far less exciting. I wasn't trying to destroy Ethan. I was trying to protect myself. If his own actions destroyed him later, that would be his responsibility, not mine. Rebecca began outlining a strategy. Simple, legal, effective. First, we would update everything, every document, every directive, every authorization. Second, we would strengthen the trust arrangements. Third, we would establish clear medical documentation confirming my mental competence. Fourth, we would create a paper trail so thorough that any future claims would collapse under scrutiny. I smiled. You make it sound easy. It is easy, she paused. If you're telling the truth, I am. Then let the evidence do the work. I liked Rebecca, a lot. By the end of that meeting, we had scheduled 3 additional appointments, one with her office, one with my financial advisor, one with my physician. Every move would happen quietly, without confrontation, without warning, without Ethan knowing. That last part was critical, because if there's one thing I've learned about investigations, it's this. People reveal the most when they think they're winning. That afternoon, I visited Dr. Raj Patel. I've known Raj for almost 15 years. Excellent doctor. Terrible golfer. Wonderful human being. The appointment lasted nearly 90 minutes. Memory testing, cognitive assessments, medical reviews, questions, more questions. At one point, he asked me to remember a sequence of words, then repeat them 20 minutes later. Frank later claimed he would have failed because he couldn't remember breakfast. That's why nobody asks Frank to testify about mental sharpness. When the evaluation ended, Dr. Patel sat back in his chair. Travis? Yes. You realize there's absolutely nothing wrong with your cognitive function. Good to know. I'm serious. So am I. He studied me, then lowered his voice. Is someone questioning your competency? I thought carefully before answering. Not yet. That answer seemed to concern him. Good. It concerned me, too. By the time I left his office, I had formal documentation confirming exactly what I already knew. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't declining. And now there would be evidence proving it. Evidence is wonderful, especially when someone else is planning to invent their own. Over the next several weeks, I started playing a role. Not a dishonest role, an exaggerated one. A performance. A strategic performance. Stay with me here. I never lied. That's important. I simply stopped correcting assumptions. For example, if Ethan repeated something because he thought I'd forgotten it, I didn't immediately point it out. If he explained a phone feature twice, I smiled and thanked him. If he acted overly protective, I let him. The effect was fascinating. The more harmless I appeared, the more confident he became. And confidence creates carelessness. Every investigator knows that. A month earlier, Ethan had been cautious. Now he was relaxed. He thought he understood the situation. He thought he was managing me. He thought he was slowly guiding events toward his desired outcome. Meanwhile, Rebecca was quietly restructuring everything, one document at a time, one signature at a time, one protection at a time. The biggest change involved Noah. That was my decision. Not because I wanted to punish Ethan, because I wanted to protect Noah. If anything happened to me, a substantial educational trust would now transfer directly for Noah's benefit. Independent, protected, untouchable. No shortcuts, no manipulation, no interference. When Rebecca finalized the paperwork, she handed me a copy. I looked down at the pages. Then I thought about Noah recording detective stories in my living room. The kid had no idea he was changing lives. He thought he was chasing imaginary squirrels. Instead, he had accidentally exposed a conspiracy. Life is strange. A few days later, Ethan invited me to lunch. Texas Roadhouse. One of his favorite places. I arrived early. He arrived 7 minutes late. Normal. Some habits never change. Throughout the meal, he seemed unusually optimistic, relaxed, almost cheerful. He asked about my health, my finances, my future plans, the usual topics. But now I could hear the hidden purpose underneath every question. And because I could hear it, I answered differently, carefully, patiently, strategically. At one point, he mentioned retirement communities again. I nodded thoughtfully. Interesting reaction. His eyes lit up immediately, just for a second. But I saw it. That tiny flash of excitement, hope, expectation, greed, whatever you want to call it. The emotion was unmistakable. And in that moment, I realized something. Ethan wasn't expecting resistance anymore. He thought progress was being made. He thought his plan was working. He thought I was drifting exactly where he wanted me. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Because while he was celebrating imaginary victories, his entire strategy was quietly being dismantled behind the scenes. One afternoon, Frank stopped by and found me sitting on the porch, smiling. That worried him. "You look happy." "I am." "That's suspicious." I laughed. Frank sat down beside me. "So how's Operation Pretend to be Harmless going?" "Surprisingly well." He shook his head. "You know, if Ethan wasn't your son, I'd almost feel bad for him." I understood, because the trap wasn't built from anger. It wasn't built from revenge. It was built from patience. Every day Ethan became more confident. Every day he revealed a little more. Every day he moved one step closer to exposing himself. And sooner or later, people driven by greed always make the same mistake. They rush. I just didn't know yet how spectacular Ethan's mistake was about to be. The mistake arrived on a Wednesday afternoon at 2:17 p.m., and it arrived in my email inbox. To this day, I still don't know whether Ethan accidentally clicked the wrong contact or simply stopped paying attention. Either way, greed finally did what evidence alone could not. It made him careless. I was sitting in my kitchen paying bills when my laptop chimed. New email, nothing unusual. I almost ignored it. Most emails at my age involve prescription reminders, advertisements for products I don't need, or warnings that my vehicle warranty expired sometime during the Obama administration. Instead, I opened it. The sender's name immediately caught my attention. Ethan Reed. The subject line was even stranger. Updated property figures. For a moment, I assumed he'd sent it intentionally. Maybe it involved one of his listings. Maybe he wanted advice. Then I opened the message. 3 attachments. No explanation, no greeting, no signature, just 3 documents. And the second I saw them, my pulse quickened. The first attachment was a property valuation report. My property valuation report. My house, my address, my home. The house Linda and I bought in 1987. The house Ethan grew up in. The house Noah loved visiting. The report estimated its market value at approximately $268,500. That seemed accurate. The housing market had been strong. Nothing surprising there. Then I opened the second document. That one nearly made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievably stupid. The document was a proposed purchase agreement, a draft agreement, prepared but not finalized. Buyer, Derek Sutton. Holdings, LLC. Property. My house. Purchase price $142,000. I stared at the screen. Then I stared some more. Then I leaned back in my chair and laughed out loud. A bitter laugh. The kind people laugh when something becomes so absurd that anger takes a temporary coffee break. $142,000 for a house worth nearly twice that amount. Not a bargain. A theft. A legal-looking theft. The type that happens on paper instead of in dark alleys. The type people justify with signatures and technicalities. The type that leaves victims wondering how something could be legal and wrong at the same time. I opened the third attachment. That was where things became truly interesting, because the third attachment wasn't supposed to reach me. Not in a million years. It was an internal email chain, a conversation between Ethan, Derek, and someone from a title company. The message discussed timelines, paperwork, transfer logistics, and projected profit margins. Profit margins. On my house, the house I still lived in, the house they had not yet convinced me to surrender, the house they were already calculating profits from. Stay with me here. This next part matters. Sometimes evidence doesn't arrive dramatically. Sometimes it quietly walks through the front door and introduces itself. That email was exactly that. A confession disguised as administrative paperwork. I immediately forwarded everything to Rebecca, then to a secure backup account, then to another backup. I wasn't taking chances. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Rebecca. I answered immediately. You got the email. I got the email. Long pause. Then she laughed. Rebecca Lawson rarely laughed, which meant this was significant. Travis? Yes. Your son just handed us a gift. I had the same thought. Please tell me you saved everything. 3 copies. Good. Another pause, then her voice became serious again. This changes things. I knew it did, because now we had more than intent, more than conversation, more than planning. We had documentation, actual documentation, the kind judges understand, the kind investigators understand, the kind lawyers love. By the time I hung up, I was feeling something new. Not victory, not yet. Confidence. There's a difference. Victory is the end. Confidence is knowing the end is approaching. That evening, Frank came over, naturally. News like this spreads quickly among retired men with too much free time. I showed him the documents. Halfway through reading them, he removed his glasses, then cleaned them, then put them back on, then read the documents again. Please tell me I'm misunderstanding this. You're not. They actually put this in writing. Apparently. Frank shook his head slowly. Criminal masterminds, they are not. That became our running joke. Every investigator has seen it. People spend months constructing complicated plans, then destroy themselves with one careless mistake: a text message, an email, a voicemail. Something stupid, something preventable, something human. Ethan's mistake happened because he was rushing. And he was rushing because he was feeling pressure. Pressure creates shortcuts. Shortcuts create evidence. The next several days became strangely calm, almost peaceful, which felt odd considering my son was actively attempting to steal my future. But here's what changed. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. And waiting can be powerful, especially when someone else thinks they're winning. Friday afternoon, Ethan called. "Hey, Dad!" His voice sounded upbeat, relaxed, confident, dangerously confident. "How are things?" "Pretty good." We chatted for a few minutes. Sports, weather, the usual. Then he casually mentioned another meeting. "Maybe next week we can sit down and go over some planning documents." Planning documents. There it was again, the same phrase, the same strategy. Only now I knew exactly what those documents would contain. I almost smiled. Instead, I kept my voice neutral. "Sure." "Great. I'll make time." He sounded pleased, very pleased, and that worried me, because confidence often means movement. Movement means action. Action means mistakes. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking. Not about money, not about property, about Ethan. I kept returning to the same question. When exactly had he crossed the line? Not financially, morally. At what point does a struggling son become a man willing to manipulate his own father? Was it the debt, the pressure, the fear, the pride? I didn't know. Maybe I never would. Life rarely provides satisfying answers, but one thing had become clear. The son I remembered and the man sitting across from Derek Sutton weren't the same person anymore. That realization hurt, more than the financial threat, more than the deception. Because money can be recovered. Trust can't. The following Monday, Rebecca called with an update. Everything was ready, the trust revisions, the documentation, the legal protections. Every safeguard was now in place, quietly, completely, legally. Most importantly, Ethan had no idea, not yet. Rebecca also suggested something else. A formal meeting, not immediately, soon. A meeting involving everyone necessary, the right people, the right documentation, the right witnesses. The truth presented all at once. I liked the idea. Not because it would embarrass Ethan, because it would eliminate arguments. Facts are stubborn things, especially when they're organized. Over the next week, Ethan became increasingly enthusiastic. More calls, more suggestions, more discussions about planning. Every conversation confirmed the same thing. He believed he was approaching the finish line. He believed the house was nearly his. He believed the paperwork would soon follow. And because he believed those things, he stopped being careful. The trap was almost complete. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal protections were finished. The timeline was ready. All that remained was one final piece, one final conversation, one final meeting, one final opportunity for Ethan to hear his own voice reveal exactly who he had become. And while I was preparing for that confrontation, something unexpected happened. Something involving Noah. Something that reminded me why this fight mattered in the first place. 3 days before the meeting, Noah asked me a question I wasn't prepared to answer. Not because it was complicated, because it was honest. And honest questions are often the hardest ones. It happened on a Saturday morning, one of our Saturdays, the kind I'd come to treasure over the years. Noah arrived at my house around 9 o'clock carrying his backpack, his tablet, and enough energy to power a small city. The weather was perfect. 72 degrees, clear Iowa sky, light breeze. The sort of day that makes you believe everything will eventually be okay. Life enjoys irony. That morning we drove to Bever Park. Noah wanted to test a homemade wildlife observation system. His words, not mine. The system turned out to be a cardboard box covered in stickers and held together with approximately 4 pounds of tape. I asked what it did. He explained it was designed to help identify suspicious squirrels. Naturally, at this point I had stopped questioning the squirrel investigations. You learn to choose your battles. For nearly an hour, we sat beneath a large oak tree while Noah conducted surveillance operations. The squirrels remained unaware, or perhaps simply unimpressed. Either way, no arrests were made. Afterward, we stopped at Dairy Queen on First Avenue. Noah ordered a blizzard so large it seemed physically impossible for a 9-year-old to finish. He finished it. Children possess powers science still doesn't understand. We sat outside at a picnic table, just talking, the way grandparents and grandchildren do. Random subjects, school, friends, video games, dinosaurs, squirrels, the usual important topics. Then Noah became unusually quiet. That got my attention immediately. Noah wasn't a quiet child. Silence from him usually meant one of two things. Either he had broken something, or he was thinking about something serious. After a minute, he looked down at his cup. Then he asked, "Grandpa?" "Yeah, buddy." "Is Dad mad at you?" Just like that. No warning, no build-up, straight to the heart of the matter. I felt my stomach tighten, not because of the question, because it meant he had noticed. Children notice more than adults think. Far more. I set down my spoon. "What makes you ask that?" Noah shrugged. But it wasn't a casual shrug, it was a worried shrug. There's a difference. He talks differently sometimes. Differently. That word stayed with me. Not angry, not mean. Differently. Even a child could hear it. I chose my next words carefully, very carefully, because this moment mattered a lot. No child should be forced to choose sides between people they love, especially not because adults failed each other. Your dad loves you. I know. He loves me too. Noah looked uncertain. Then why does he seem upset all the time? That one hurt, because I didn't have a simple answer. And because part of me wanted to tell him everything, the recording, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, all of it. But that would have been selfish. Children deserve protection from adult conflicts whenever possible. So I told him the truth, just not all of it. Sometimes grown-ups get scared. Scared of what? Lots of things. Like monsters. I smiled. Different kind of monsters. Noah thought about that, then nodded slowly. The answer seemed to satisfy him, at least for the moment. We sat quietly for a while, watching cars pass, listening to distant traffic. Then Noah spoke again. "You're not mad at Dad, are you?" That question nearly broke my heart, because the answer was complicated. I was angry. Of course I was angry, furious actually. But children don't need complicated, they need safe. So I gave him safe. "I love your dad." That part was true. "I always will." That part was true too. Noah seemed relieved. Then he smiled. And just like that, the heavy moment passed. The way children often move through emotions faster than adults. 5 minutes later, he was discussing dinosaur combat strategies again. Life is strange. One moment you're navigating heartbreak. The next you're debating whether a triceratops could defeat a Tyrannosaurus rex. Personally, I sided with the triceratops. Noah disagreed. The debate remains unresolved. Later that afternoon, we returned to my house. Frank was already there. Naturally. The man appeared so frequently, I was beginning to suspect he secretly owned part of the property. Noah immediately recruited Frank into another squirrel investigation. Frank immediately regretted agreeing. Everything proceeded normally until Noah disappeared into the living room. A few minutes later, he returned carrying something, a small sheet of stickers, colorful dinosaur stickers. He walked over and handed one to me. I looked down. Green dinosaur, big smile, tiny arms, the world's least intimidating predator. "What's this for?" Noah grinned. "For luck." "Luck?" "Yeah." I laughed. "What do I need luck for?" He thought about that, then shrugged. "Just in case." Children sometimes say things that feel far wiser than they realize. This was one of those moments. I took the sticker, then carefully attached it to the front of a plain manila folder sitting on my desk. The folder containing every piece of evidence against Ethan, the recording, the emails, the documents, everything. Noah smiled proudly. Mission accomplished. He had no idea what was inside the folder, no idea what was coming. No idea that his accidental recording had changed the course of multiple lives. To him, it was simply a dinosaur sticker. To me, it became something else. A reminder. A reminder of why I was fighting. Not for money, not for revenge, not even for the house, for family, for truth, for the little boy standing in front of me. That evening, after Noah went home, Frank and I sat on the back porch. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the yard. For a while, neither of us spoke. Eventually, Frank pointed toward the folder on my kitchen table. The dinosaur sticker was clearly visible through the window. "You keeping that?" "Absolutely," Frank laughed. "Professional legal strategy. Best one we've got." He nodded. Then his expression became serious. "How are you feeling about Tuesday?" Tuesday, the meeting, the confrontation, the moment everything would finally come into the open. I thought about the question carefully, then answered honestly. "Nervous?" Frank looked surprised. "You?" "Especially me. Because here's the thing people don't understand. Standing up to strangers is easy. Standing up to your own child is hard. Very hard. No matter what they've done. No matter what they've become. A part of you still remembers who they used to be." Frank nodded slowly. "I get that." We sat in silence again, watching the last light disappear. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Whatever happens Tuesday, remember something." "What's that?" "You didn't create this." I looked down, because deep inside part of me still wondered whether I'd failed somehow. As a father, as a man, as a parent. Frank seemed to read my thoughts. "He made his choices, Travis." "Maybe. But knowing that doesn't make them hurt less." Tuesday morning was now only 48 hours away. The evidence was ready. The witnesses were ready. Rebecca was ready. I was ready, or at least as ready as I could be. The dinosaur sticker remained attached to the evidence folder. And when I walked into the most important meeting of my life, that ridiculous green dinosaur was coming with me. Because by then, the trap was complete. And for the first time since hearing that recording, I knew exactly how the story was going to end. What I didn't know was how much it would hurt to watch it happen. Tuesday arrived gray and cool, the kind of Iowa morning that feels undecided. Not quite rain, not quite sunshine, just a sky hanging low over the city like it was waiting to see what happened next. Honestly, so was I. I woke up at 5:42 a.m., not because of an alarm, because sleep had become impossible. I made coffee, burned the first pot because my mind was somewhere else, made a second pot. Much better. At 7:30, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the evidence folder. The green dinosaur sticker smiled back at me. For a moment, I laughed. Then I almost cried. Funny how those emotions sometimes live right next door to each other. By 8:15, Frank arrived. He walked inside carrying 2 coffees. "Just in case you ruined yours again." "You're a good friend." "I know." We drove downtown together. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't anything left to say. The preparation was finished. The evidence was ready. Now it was time for the truth. The meeting was scheduled for 9:30 at Rebecca Lawson's office. Officially, it was supposed to be a discussion regarding estate planning and future asset management. That was what Ethan believed. That was what Derek believed. That was what everyone had been told. The reality was something very different. When we arrived, Rebecca was already waiting. So was Dr. Patel. And so was a representative from Adult Protective Services named Karen Mitchell. Karen had spent nearly 20 years investigating elder financial exploitation. Calm, professional, extremely difficult to fool. Exactly the kind of person I wanted present. Rebecca greeted me with a small nod. Everything was ready. At 9:27 a.m., Ethan arrived. 3 minutes early. A small detail, but one that told me a lot. He was eager, confident, optimistic. The look on his face almost hurt to see, because I knew what was coming, and he didn't. A minute later, Derek Sutton walked in carrying a leather portfolio. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive confidence. Neither of those things would help him today. The introductions were brief. Everyone sat down around the conference table. For a few minutes, the meeting unfolded exactly as Ethan expected. Small talk, coffee, polite conversation, estate planning discussions, routine questions. Nothing unusual. Ethan relaxed visibly. That was important, very important, because people reveal themselves when they're comfortable. Eventually, Rebecca opened a folder. Before we discuss future planning, she said, there are a few issues we need to address. Ethan nodded. No concern. Not yet. Rebecca continued. Ethan, you've expressed concerns regarding your father's ability to manage his personal affairs. There it was. The opening move. Ethan leaned forward. I have. His voice sounded sincere, practiced, concerned. If I hadn't heard the recording, I might have believed him myself. He forgets things sometimes. I remained silent. He lives alone. Silent. I'm worried about his future. Still silent. Karen Mitchell made a note. Dr. Patel folded his hands. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully, then asked, what specific concerns do you have? The answer came immediately. Too immediately. Prepared. Rehearsed. Ethan began listing examples. Confusion, memory issues, difficulty handling responsibilities, exactly as described in the recording. Exactly. Every word, every claim, every planned allegation. As he spoke, Derek occasionally nodded in agreement. The performance was impressive. Unfortunately for them, performances struggle when confronted by evidence. After several minutes, Rebecca turned toward me. Travis, would you like to respond? I looked at Ethan. Really looked at him. For the first time all morning. My son, the little boy from the fishing photographs, the teenager who used to borrow my truck, the man sitting across from me now. For a brief second, I wished none of this was happening. Then I remembered the recording. I remembered Noah. I remembered the lies. And the feeling passed. Actually, I said quietly, I'd like everyone to listen to something. The room became still. Rebecca slid a small speaker onto the conference table. I placed the dinosaur sticker folder beside it. Frank noticed, smiled slightly, then looked away. I connected the device, pressed play. The recording began. At first, nobody reacted, just background noise. Footsteps. A door closing. The hum of an air conditioner. Then Ethan's voice filled the room. He's starting to trust me more. Silence. Absolute silence. I watched the color drain from Ethan's face. Immediately. Completely. Across the table, Derek froze. The confidence disappeared so quickly it was almost impressive. The recording continued. Every sentence, every plan, every discussion, every lie, every calculation, every detail. Nobody interrupted. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. 22 minutes can feel very long under certain circumstances. This was one of them. Halfway through, Ethan attempted to say something. Rebecca stopped him. No. Just one word. No. The recording continued. The discussion about my competency, the property transfer, the fabricated incidents, the power of attorney strategy, the financial motives. Everything. At one point, Karen Mitchell simply closed her notebook and listened. That told me everything I needed to know. The evidence was speaking for itself. When the recording finally ended, nobody said a word. Not immediately. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Ethan spoke. Dad? No. My turn. Just like Rebecca earlier. No. His mouth closed. For the first time in months, he had nothing prepared. Nothing rehearsed. Nothing ready. Because truth destroys preparation. I opened the folder, one document at a time. The audio analysis, the metadata reports, the location findings, the timeline, the email he accidentally sent me, the draft purchase agreement, the valuation documents, the profit calculations. Every piece of evidence, organized, documented, verified, methodical, professional, overwhelming. As I explained each item, Ethan's expression changed. Shock, fear, panic. Then something else. Recognition. The realization that there was no escape route, no alternate explanation, no way out. Derek attempted one weak objection. Rebecca dismantled it in less than 30 seconds. Dr. Patel presented the cognitive assessment results. Perfectly normal, perfectly competent. Karen documented everything. The room felt less like a meeting and more like a collapse, a controlled collapse, the collapse of a lie. Eventually, Ethan lowered his head. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just lowered it, defeated. I was trying to fix things. His voice barely rose above a whisper. For a moment, nobody responded. Then I did. You were trying to fix your problems. Silence. With my life. More silence, because there wasn't anything left to say. That was the truth. Simple, painful, complete. A few minutes later, the meeting ended. Not with shouting, not with threats, not with drama, just consequences. Professional consequences. Legal consequences. Real consequences. Derek left first, looking significantly less confident than he had arrived. Karen remained behind to discuss next steps. Rebecca began organizing documents. Frank sat quietly beside me. Ethan stood near the doorway, alone. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the recording again, the planning, the deception, the willingness to sacrifice me, and the feeling disappeared. Eventually, he looked at me. His eyes were full of regret, real regret. I believe that. The problem was timing. Regret arrives cheaply after failure. Character arrives before it. Without another word, Ethan walked out. The door closed behind him. And just like that, it was over. Or at least the battle was. The consequences were only beginning. Because exposing the truth is one thing. Living with it afterward is something else entirely. The strange thing about winning is that sometimes it doesn't feel like winning at all. For weeks after that meeting, people kept telling me I should feel relieved. And I did. Partly. I kept my house, my savings, my independence. The trust protecting Noah was secure. The evidence had done exactly what it was supposed to do. Objectively speaking, everything had worked. But life isn't lived objectively. Life is lived emotionally. And emotionally, there was no celebration waiting for me when I got home that afternoon. Just silence. The same silence that had filled the house after Linda died. The same silence that reminds you some victories come with a price. Frank stayed with me for a few hours after the meeting. We sat on the back porch drinking coffee that neither of us really wanted. Eventually, he looked over at me. You did the right thing. I nodded. I know. Then why do you look miserable? Because he was Frank. And because Frank always asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. I stared out at the backyard. At the bird feeder Linda used to refill every morning. At the old oak tree Noah loved climbing. At the fence I kept promising to repair. Then I answered honestly. Because I didn't want to be right. Frank didn't respond. He understood. That's one of the reasons we'd stayed friends for over 30 years. The best friends know when silence is more useful than advice. The next few weeks moved quickly. Adult Protective Services opened a formal review. Nothing dramatic, nothing television-worthy, just paperwork, interviews, documentation, professional people doing professional work. The recording carried enormous weight. The email carried even more. By the end of the review, it became clear that Ethan's actions had crossed several lines, not criminal enough to send him to prison, but serious enough to create consequences. Real consequences. The local real estate board launched an ethics investigation. Several business relationships disappeared almost overnight. People who had once answered Ethan's calls suddenly became difficult to reach. Funny how that works. Derek Sutton suffered as well. Apparently, investors become less enthusiastic when they discover you've been discussing fraudulent property acquisition strategies on recorded audio. Who knew? The partnership between Derek and Ethan dissolved within 2 months. That didn't surprise me. Partnerships built on greed rarely survive adversity. Each person eventually looks for someone else to blame. Meanwhile, I focused on something more important. Noah. Because throughout all of this, he remained the person I worried about most. Not myself. Not the money. Noah. Children always end up standing closest to the damage adults create, whether they deserve it or not. One Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after the meeting, Noah and I were sitting at Riley's cafe eating pancakes, his favorite, chocolate chip, extra syrup, a meal that probably violated several nutritional guidelines. Worth it. Completely worth it. He was telling me about a science project involving volcanoes when he suddenly stopped talking. Then he asked, "Is Dad okay?" There it was. The question I knew would eventually come. I put down my coffee cup, carefully, slowly, the same way I'd answered his questions before, with honesty, but not burden. "Your dad's having a hard time right now." Noah nodded. "He seems sad." "He probably is." "Are you sad too?" I smiled. A small one, the truthful kind. Sometimes. That answer seemed acceptable, because children don't require perfect answers. They require real ones. After a moment, Noah returned to discussing volcanoes. Crisis resolved, at least for now. I watched him talk, watched him laugh, watched him become excited over things that adults often forget to appreciate. And in that moment, I knew every difficult decision had been worth it. Not because I had protected my property, because I had protected his future. A few months later, Rebecca finalized the educational trust. A substantial portion of my estate would now transfer directly to Noah someday. Protected, structured, safe. Not because I didn't love Ethan, because I loved Noah too. And because trust should be earned, not inherited automatically. People don't always like hearing that, but it's true. Then came the letter. The letter arrived almost 4 months after the meeting. Plain envelope. No return address. Handwritten. I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. Parents always do. I carried it into the kitchen, made coffee, sat down, and opened it. The letter was only 2 pages long. No legal arguments, no excuses. No attempts to justify what happened. Just an apology. A genuine one. Or at least it felt genuine. He admitted the debt, the pressure, the fear, the panic, the terrible decisions, the shame. Most importantly, he admitted something else. He admitted that somewhere along the way he'd stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a solution. That sentence stayed with me. Because I think it was true. The letter ended simply. "I'm sorry, Dad." Nothing dramatic. Nothing manipulative. Just those 3 words. I folded the letter, placed it back inside the envelope, and put it in a drawer. People always ask whether I forgave him. The answer is complicated. I stopped being angry. Eventually. Anger is exhausting. Nobody can carry it forever. Forgiveness, though, forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process. A long one. And at the time I'm telling you this story, that process wasn't finished yet. Maybe it never will be completely. Some wounds heal. Others become scars. Scars don't disappear. They simply stop hurting every day. Ethan and I didn't stop speaking entirely, but things changed. Conversations became shorter, less frequent, more careful. Trust takes years to build, minutes to destroy, and often much longer to rebuild, if it ever comes back at all. That's the part people don't tell you. Justice solves problems. It doesn't automatically repair relationships. The relationship between Ethan and me survived. Barely. But it survived. And maybe that's enough for now. As for me, life eventually returned to something close to normal. I still drive my old Ford Ranger. I still drink coffee at Riley's Cafe. Frank still shows up uninvited. Noah still investigates suspicious squirrels. Some things never change. Thank goodness. And every once in a while when Noah visits, I see that green dinosaur sticker still attached to the corner of my office filing cabinet. I never removed it. Probably never will. Because every time I see it, I'm reminded of something important. The truth doesn't always arrive through lawyers, or investigators, or experts. Sometimes it arrives through a little boy who forgot his tablet. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Life lesson. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. The people we love are capable of disappointing us, sometimes deeply, sometimes in ways we never imagined possible. But protecting yourself does not mean you stopped loving them. Too many people believe they must choose between compassion and boundaries. You don't. You can love someone and still refuse to let them harm you. You can care about someone and still hold them accountable. You can forgive someone and still remember what happened. And perhaps most importantly, never underestimate your own experience. The world often treats older people as if their value fades with age. It doesn't. Wisdom is earned 1 year at a time, one mistake at a time, one lesson at a time. Trust your instincts. Pay attention when something feels wrong, and remember that truth has a remarkable way of revealing itself, especially when greed becomes louder than common sense. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.